Hi. So we've had a really great time over on the Access stage today hearing from 10 amazing startups that are doing incredible things in health tech. I've had such a great day. It's been really, really fascinating. And the judges were really, really impressed with all 10 of the startups who pitched. They had one honorable mention for Samphire Neuroscience, which is a company that's making neurotechnology that is supposed to reduce period pain and is seeing some really amazing results. So that's an honorable mention. But there's only one winner, and that is Phare Bio, which is kind of doing AI antibiotic drug discovery. But I'll let the founder, Akhila, tell you more. Congratulations.
Well, what a great honor. And thank you all for showcasing AMR so prominently today. So to bookend our day with the discussion from the brilliant Dame Sally Davies, AMR is clearly an urgent crisis. And we've really built Phare Bio off the backs of a breakthrough which we think will chart the future of addressing AMR. And I think it's very appropriate that we are talking about this at Wired, where technology is really a beacon of hope. And I think in this space especially, we feel that we can turn the tide of what has been a really kind of doom and gloom narrative in this space and really chart a new path to the future. Phare Bio was founded in 2020 based on the discovery of the first ever antibiotic using AI. And that discovery came out of Jim Collins' lab at MIT. Jim has been a founder of the field of synthetic biology. And this discovery really energized a field that wasn't getting much life and much attention. And in particular, he was able to discover an antibiotic that addressed a superbug. So these are what Dame Sally Davies was discussing, the most drug-resistant and deadly bacterial pathogens in the world. We launched this whole project, so Phare Bio is the translational arm of all of these antibiotics coming out of this MIT lab. And we generated attention both from, of course, peer-reviewed journals, but also media, and then thankfully funders who haven't traditionally engaged in this space. And one in particular, the Audacious Project under TED, which funds powerful solutions to some of the world's most urgent challenges, decided to help us launch this effort with a little less than $25 million. And we were off to the races. And in the last 4 years, we've had an additional 3 novel antibiotic discoveries. We've moved from predictive to generative AI, and we recently received a $27 million ARPA-H award to really accelerate and scale our progress. So as Dame Sally Davies mentioned, we are in an escalating crisis. And I think only recently are we starting to hear a bit more about it because it's become that urgent that if we ignore this, the entire foundation of our healthcare system is at risk of collapsing. 39 million deaths by 2050. But one optimistic point I want to make is 11 million of those deaths could be prevented by the discovery of novel antibiotics against gram-negative pathogens, some of the most deadly of those superbugs. Half of all hospital infections are antibiotic resistant. Again, we have the tools to rebuild our armamentarium, and we just need to deploy them in smart and cost-effective and efficient ways. So just to give you one perspective on this, it takes less than 6 years to develop resistance to a new antibiotic. And it takes 12 years to develop a new antibiotic. So you can see that clearly we are losing the race against resistance ever more every single day, especially as we're developing recombinations of existing antibiotics and not really going after what's most needed, which is novel mechanisms of action, novel classes of antibiotics that bacteria haven't gotten smart enough to evade yet. And so we feel that with AI, which can be incredibly powerful at targeting novelty, as well as the ability to quickly identify new antibiotics, we can turn the clock of resistance back, and we could turn the clock of resistance forward so that we can lengthen the amount of time it takes to develop resistance while reducing the time to develop a new antibiotic, and therefore finally outpace these extraordinarily evasive superbugs. So our goal is to develop 15 novel classes of antibiotics over the next 5 years. Ambitious, but totally solvable, we feel. And the reason is because of this powerful technology And also, we're using a novel business model. We're only taking philanthropic and grant funding until we can de-risk all of our antibiotics into clinical trials. And that really solves some of the really misaligned economics in early stage AMR development. And these 15, so you might be saying, well, why 15? And there's been a number of studies that have shown that with 15 new antibiotics, you can actually replenish the early stage global pipeline sufficiently enough that you can actually target resistance across all antibiotics. So this is really what it takes, this global effort to solve this problem. So what I want to leave you with today, amongst many specifics, is this general idea that this is an existential threat that is solvable. And I want to give you one example of how we're taking this on. So over the last 4 years, we moved from predictive to generative AI. And that might sound like, okay, interesting platform development, but it has completely unlocked for us an entirely new way to solve this problem that is much more cost-effective, more precise, with more novel antibiotics, and we're already seeing some extraordinary results. So in a nutshell, what generative AI enables us to do is to design our own antibiotics after we train our models on what particular structures can kill particular bacteria. So it's a fairly simple training. And the reason why our training can be so simple is that it's a very tight feedback loop and a very simple feedback loop with antibiotics that I would argue is one of the simplest and most efficient in AI for drug discovery. And that's because when you train a model, you can quickly test your compound in a petri dish. This is one of the oldest and cheapest technologies in medicine. You learn this in high school or in college, how a basic microbiology task. That petri dish, the way you rate how well that compound is killing a bacteria is what's called a minimum inhibitory concentration. It's a quantified number. It's been used since the beginning of antibiotics. And that you can take that number and then retrain your models. So we've had an extraordinarily fast, active training feedback loop. And I think that's why we've been able to be ahead of the curve. We started this effort in 2020. Our scientists have been working on this really since 2018. And we've had so many turns of our platform and our vision and our approach that I think has given us a big advantage. And the other piece I want to mention, so generative AI, so you can quickly have this rapid feedback loop, but generative AI also enables you to take that trained model and actually design your compounds from scratch. We are now no longer beholden to compound libraries that are publicly available. Much of the low-hanging fruit has already been picked. Now we actually in silico design those compounds, and we're already starting to see how novel we can get in the mechanisms of action. The second huge advantage of generative AI is that we can now incorporate drug-like characteristics into the training of our model. So what does that mean? That means that instead of having extraordinarily expensive, time-consuming, error-prone toxicology work that you conduct once you have your compounds, you can pull that into how you train your models. So what we're trying to do is de-risk our compounds as much as possible in silico. This is especially important in antibiotics where cost and risk reduction can finally make this economically viable for investors and for partners. So we're now incorporating toxicology, oral formulations so that these drugs are more accessible. Another issue that Dame Sally Davies mentioned, we're incorporating solubility, half-life, stability, so that we can get patients out of the hospital and able to take these drugs. So with this indication targeting engine, the novelty of generative AI, and the ability now for us to scale this effort with the funding that we've received, we are now building what we think is the world's largest and most comprehensive early stage pipeline of antibiotics in the world to actually try to solve this problem. So over the next 5 years, again, we're aiming for 15 novel classes of antibiotics. We've already been able to discover 3 that we're pushing forward into our preclinical development. And the last point I want to make is that we're open accessing all of the training data that we're using to train our models. So all of those toxicology parameters, all of the efficacy against particular bacteria, oral formulation. And what we hope is that this serves as not only a model for AI for antibiotics, but AI for drug discovery writ large. We feel that there really is too much siloing of data and models across biotechnology and pharma. And like how tech is moving in the direction of more of an open playing field, we feel that this could serve as a model, as a public good that could also lift all boats in this industry. So this open access data we expect to release in 2026, and we hope that researchers anywhere in the world can train their own models, develop their own antibiotics, and again, help us really solve this global challenge. Thank you.
Akhila, a couple of questions. Congratulations, first of all. Great work. Just a couple of questions, really. You mentioned something like, and correct me if I'm wrong, 6 years, more or less, when a bacteria becomes resistant to new drugs entering the system. Is there a problem where, once you start developing these drugs and they enter the system, because there's such an abuse in the way we use them, that we're going to have to keep churning out these drugs to solve the problem? Is that an issue?
This is a great question. This is getting at the heart of resistance. So that's why we really feel that novelty is so important here. So we're not saying that if we develop a novel antibiotic, that means we've solved the resistance issue. Bacteria have been extraordinarily smart and competitive, and they're constantly competing with each other, and they've been competing with antibiotics for the last 60 or 70 years. So we don't feel that will ever eliminate that risk. But if you have novel compounds, you will extend that time frame. So even if we can get to 7 to 10 years without resistance, I think that's a huge win. The second piece of this is this idea of stewardship. It's making sure that we really use the antibiotics when they're most needed, coupling them with diagnostics so that you actually know what bug you're treating from the get-go once a patient walks into the hospital, as opposed to 3 days later when you've already blasted them with gram-negative broad-spectrum antibiotics, which is a big cause of our resistance problem right now. So I think it will take, like Sally Davies mentioned, behavioral changes, as well as I really think that we need to replenish our armamentarium of antibiotics.
Dame Sally has been talking about this for a while. I remember one of her first talks at Wired talking about that, and I think it was like 10 years ago. It feels like this is a crisis like lurking in the background, where we're facing a lot more urgent situations in geopolitics, health, COVID, etc. Do you feel that people are paying attention to this possible epidemic, or is there still work to be done so this can be being brought to the fore of what support you need, for instance, to do your work?
I think it's constantly an unseen pandemic, to be honest. And we notice that, just a lot of times people are surprised that this could be a leading cause of death by 2050. And I think that, thankfully, most people haven't had one degree of separation from someone who's had AMR. So that's a good thing. But the downside is, and then I think the unseen part of this is that a lot of times you don't understand why someone is dying in a hospital. And many times it is because of a bacterial infection, even though it might be coded as a heart attack or something else. And so I think that the education level is something that we need to increase. I also think that this is falling through the cracks between grant funding and philanthropic funding and commercial funding. And so we do need some of those better models, like subscription models that decouple volume of sale from the price of the product. So I think incentives, education, and then I think also, providers oftentimes use the same old antibiotics. And sometimes that's just because of the reimbursement system, but I think there's also some health systems work that we need to do. But I do want to leave on an optimistic note. I really do think that, if you do the math on this, this is one of those that with public-private partnerships, new technologies, passionate entrepreneurs, the space can really be pushed forward. So I think we're really at that inflection point where even if it's not being talked about, constantly, I do think that there's ways that we can efficiently solve this.
Just a last question on the funding. A lot of philanthropic, obviously this is basic research, a lot of it is with the current cuts that are happening with Trump's presidency, do you think there's a crisis point coming in terms of how basic research is going to be funded for this?
We haven't seen any signals of that yet.
Okay.
So thankfully, it hasn't directly affected us. I think thankfully there's a sense that you can't have a health system without this foundational technology. So, so far it hasn't affected us.
Okay, I hope it keeps that way. Thank you so much, and congratulations once again. Thank you.